want to thank Professor Weinstein and Alex and Jenna for helping to bring me here. Try not to embarrass my daughter. She used to not let me come to school for fear that I would embarrass her, so this is a big moment for both of us. How many 3Ls do we have here? 2 Ls? 1 Ls. Oh. How many of you think you might want to be trial lawyers? How many don't want to be trial lawyers? Okay. So what are you doing here? Free lunch? Really what I'm doing here, other than the chance to see Jackie, really why I'm here is I would like to recruit you to become trial lawyers. It's, I go around, I speak to various lawyer organizations over the years, mostly trial lawyer groups, plaintiff lawyer groups, and almost always the audience is heavily weighted to people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, on up, 70s, 80s. It's pretty unusual to see somebody in their 20s or 30s. I think that's disturbing. What I want to do today is convince you that you can be a trial lawyer, try to help you overcome whatever doubts you might have about that, try to convince you that you should be a trial lawyer, and try to convince you that you can live a very rich and rewarding life being a trial lawyer, despite the challenges. Now, if we go to the issues that, at least in my experience, sort of keep people from, or hold people back from being a trial lawyer, one of the key ones, I think, is this image that people have that you need a sort of larger-than-life personality, made-for-TV personality in order to be successful in the courtroom. And I would tell you that, at least from what I've seen, nothing could be further from the truth. And I thought the best way to explain that is to give you sort of a couple of vignettes of my early years as a trial lawyer. Probably my first semi-trial lawyer experience happened in law school. First year moot court, everybody was required to do it. We came into a room that was probably about this big. There were 3 law professors there. There was myself, my partner, and our 2 opponents. That was the audience in this moot court. I got up to the lectern, started to speak, and nothing would come out of my mouth. I've never had that happen before. Literally, I could not get a word out. And finally, one of the professors said, "Why don't you talk about jurisdiction?" And so I sort of fumbled along and got going. Second year of law school, we had an advocacy class. We met every Friday, 25 of us. We were taught by a lawyer in Boston from a very big firm. He's a very well-known litigator. He'd represented President Nixon during the Watergate hearings. Very famous guy. And at some point, all the sections were brought together, and we had to demonstrate. I don't know how often that happened, maybe once a month. And so it came time, all the sections were brought together, about 150 people in the room, and my job was to give an opening statement. And when I was done with the opening statement, my professor, in front of 150 people, said, "What in the world were you trying to do?" I said, "Well, I was trying to give an opening statement." And he said, "I didn't understand a single point you were trying to make. What were you trying to do?" In retrospect, I wish I'd said, "Well, I did everything you taught me," but I didn't. I was just mortified. Next summer, between second and third year of law school, I'm working in the DA's office in Ketchikan, Alaska, small town, very southern tip of Alaska. And in Alaska at that time was a student practice rule. If you had 2 years of law school behind you, you could go into court and actually speak and do trials if you had a supervisor there with you. So all through the summer, as they're having me write briefs on cocaine possession and things like that, I'm bugging my boss. There are only two DAs in the whole office. I'm bugging my boss. Can I do a trial? Can I do a trial? Can I do a trial? We get to the last couple weeks, and he finally says, okay, you can do this trial. It's an attempted fish snagging case, which for those of you who aren't fishermen, fish snagging is where you take a treble hook and you cast it past the fish, and then you yank really hard in the hopes that the hook will kind of snag into the side of the fish, and then you reel them in. It's considered unsportsmanlike, it's considered illegal, although you'd have to work hard to find a less serious crime in Alaska than fish snagging. And certainly attempted fish snagging, which my guess is has never been prosecuted before or since. But the Fish and Wildlife officer had sat in the bushes and watched these high school kids attempting to snag fish as he saw it. Now the defense, of course, is no, we were just reeling in our lines and the hooks would get caught on the rocks or seaweed and we'd have to pull. My boss did not want to prosecute that case. He gave it to me. I said, okay, so when do we go in? And he said, well, I'm not going in. I wouldn't be prosecuting that case. You go do it. You wanted this case. I said, well, I need a supervisor. He said, we're in Ketchikan. You don't need a supervisor. I said, well, I haven't taken a class in evidence. And he said, well, if there's an objection that it's hearsay, just say that you're offering it not for the truth of the matter asserted. Which he might as well said Greek to me at that point. I had no idea what that meant. So I said, well, what does that mean? And he tried to explain it. I didn't understand. He said, if you get an objection and the judge sustains it, just ask the question a different way until you finally get out what you want. So I went into court. I'd never seen a trial, never seen a jury selection, but I knew you had to ask jurors questions. And so I stood up. I was the prosecutor. I was 22, 21, 22 years old. I was the prosecutor. And the judge said, okay, and I stood up, I walked to the jury, and I opened my mouth, and nothing came out, and nothing came out. And I went back to my notes. I kind of shuffled around. I came back out. I looked at the jury, and nothing would come out of my mouth. And the jury's starting to look pretty distressed by now, and I'm really distressed. I come back and I take a drink of water. I mean, this felt like it lasted about an hour. I imagine it was 2 or 3 minutes. It was still a long time. I came back out after my drink. I just stood there. I couldn't do anything. And finally the judge said, well, if you're not going to ask any questions, I will. And then he started doing voir dire, and that was my first experience in court. For the next roughly 15 years, the first day of trial, my routine was I'd get up, I'd have breakfast, I'd put on my suit, I'd go throw up, and then I'd go to court. That, for the first 2 or 3 days of every trial. That's how nervous, that's how scared, that's how socially awkward, that's who I was. And getting to know some of the lawyers from the inner circle of advocates, some of the star lawyers in the country, and lots of other star lawyers as well over the years. That's been one of the really exciting things that's happened to me in my career. What I've come to see is that about 1/3 of the successful trial lawyers are the kind of people you'd think would be trial lawyers. They're really smart, they're quick on their feet, they don't miss a beat, they're really good with people, they're extroverts, they can make a conversation with anyone, and they just feel at ease, or they seem to feel at ease wherever they are. The other 1/3 are about regular people, you know, kind of like most people. I don't really know much about regular people. And then the other 1/3 are like me. They're socially awkward, shy, introverted people who have managed to find a role for themselves, which eventually after 10, 20, or 30 years, begins to feel comfortable. A role where they're not speaking for themselves, but they're speaking for other people. And whether it's the inner circle, which does limit itself to 100 lawyers, or you take any sample of successful trial lawyers, I guarantee you it'll break down into about a third, a third, a third. And the socially awkward ones tend to be just as successful as the others. There's no certain type of personality, appearance, gender, sexual orientation, race, anything that makes you a better or worse trial lawyer. It's just not the case. What you need is an appetite for doing it, which I'll talk to you about in a while. You need a certain minimal amount of intelligence, which all of you obviously have, or you wouldn't be here. You need a willingness to work and work hard, which most of you probably have, or you wouldn't be here. And you need a certain resiliency, the ability to lose, to have bad things happen, to fail, and then to bounce back. And this thing of losing is the second thing, I think, that holds people back from a career in trial work. It's painful to lose. It's unpleasant to lose. It can feel awful. I would suggest to you that learning to lose and learning from losing is a very important life skill. Whether you like it or not, no matter how safe you try to lead your life, you are going to lose at things over the years. And who would want a predictable, no-risk life? A predictable, no-risk career, a predictable, no-risk marriage? What makes life rich are the risks, the rewards of overcoming risks. If you lose in court, what it means is you decided to fight for something that you thought was worth fighting for. And just because you lose doesn't mean it wasn't worth fighting for. When I speak to plaintiff lawyers, I'll sometimes have an audience of 100 or 200 lawyers who have been trying cases anywhere from 1 year to 50 years. And I'll ask them to do a thought experiment. And I'll ask them all to close their eyes and visualize their worst, most painful loss. And I'll ask them to think about sitting down in the courtroom next to their client and the jury filing in the foreperson handing the verdict form to the clerk, who hands it to the judge, who opens it up, and you're trying to read the face of the judge. Did we win or did we lose? And then you read, and it's a defense verdict. And I tell them, I want you to feel how that felt. Get all of those feelings back into your body from that day and feel how awful that felt. And then I say, I want you to raise your hands if right then and there, if you magically could switch places with the defense lawyer. He's just won, or she's just won a great victory. He or she's going to get paid for this trial. You're not. He or she's going home to celebrate. You're not. He and she has a happy client. Yours is miserable. Right now, you can press a button. You could go back in time. You can switch places with that defense lawyer. How many of you would do that? I've probably gone through that thought exercise with over 1,000 lawyers now. Not one has raised their hand. And I'll tell you, plaintiff lawyers are a contentious, contrary, difficult bunch. I guarantee you, if any of them had the slightest idea that they would switch, we would have heard from them. There are worse things than losing, like wasting your life at efforts that have no real meaning to you. The final barrier to becoming a trial lawyer is something I call the cancer of comparison. I don't know, does it still go on in law school? Do you compare yourselves to each other? who's getting the better grades, who's a better writer, who's a better speaker. That is something that's human nature. You know, if I've got a 3-bedroom house, I'm pretty happy with it, and then I find out my neighbor has a 4-bedroom house, and all of a sudden I feel a little one step down. I mean, there's social scientists who've studied this. This is in our DNA. We go through life comparing ourselves to others, and that's how we orient ourselves as social beings. So there's nothing evil or wrong about it, but you need to be aware of it and you need to fight against it, I believe, in the career of law. Early in my career, if I won a case, I'd have a whole list of reasons why anybody else could have won it too. And if I lost the case, I'd have a whole list of lawyers who I was certain could have won the case if they'd only tried it instead of me. The issue of comparison, this false premise that what we do is objective, is scientific, that we can compare ourselves to each other, eats away at people over the years. And I could spend a couple hours talking only about that. Let me just warn you against it. Practicing law is not like athletics. It's not like, oh, you run a 4-minute mile and I run a 4:10, so you're faster than me. It's not like that. Each lawyer brings his or her own special set of skills to the practice of law. And where this really came home to me was something I read, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. It turns out Ernest Hemingway was always disappointed throughout his life that he was never, in his mind, as great a lawyer as Tolstoy. That was one of his big unhappinesses, is that he would never be as great a lawyer as Tolstoy. I'm not writer, I'm sorry. So was he right? Was he right to sort of suffer because he wasn't as great a lawyer or a writer as Tolstoy? Have any of you heard of the author Max Brand? Didn't think so. Very popular Western writer in the 30s, 40s. Maybe America's most prolific writer. Even after he died, for the next 60 years, one book a month of his was published, or one book every 4 months was published. He wrote like 500 novels. Incredible. And translated to 30-something languages. Very, very successful writer. Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird, I hope, you know. So who's a better writer, Max Brand or Harper Lee, who only wrote one book? Or Anne Frank, or whoever you want to pick. It's been my observation that most people, especially lawyers, don't truly appreciate their own gifts. And each lawyer brings their own unique set of gifts to the practice of law or to the courtroom. Any attempt at comparing is going to drive, I mean, you can compare, I got an A, you got a B, but you know, the truth is, if your 2 exams were sent to a different contract professor, the one who got a B might have gotten an A, and the one who got an A might have gotten a B. And we see that all the time in law. It's part of the fun of being a lawyer. We're not engineers. We're not mathematicians. The human element is hugely important in what we do. So in terms of being a lawyer, whether you have what it takes, I prepared a PowerPoint. You all see PowerPoints all the time in school now? Yeah, you'll all be thrilled that I have a PowerPoint presentation. Here it is. That's it. That's the only requirement. And we could spend the rest of the day talking about what a true heart is. But it includes somebody who's willing to work hard, who's willing to get knocked to the floor and get back up, who's willing to be personally honest with themselves and with others. Jim McComas is probably the best criminal defense lawyer I ever met. And extraordinary lawyer with lots of technical skills. The truth is, in the courtroom, your heart, your character, your personality, I won't even say personality, your heart and your character are your greatest weapons. With the judge, with the jury, with your opponent. That takes a lot of work. But that's my message to you, that every one of you can be a trial lawyer if you want to be. Now, the next question is, well, why should you want to be? I came out of law school as an Ayn Rand, Ronald Reagan, libertarian, free market, capitalist Republican, a hardcore ideologue. And as a trial lawyer, over the years, I saw things other people don't get to see very much. Some of the things Professor Weinstein referred to in the introduction. Just in the last couple weeks, I've seen tobacco documents where the tobacco companies are writing internally, all of our smokers are dying out or quitting. We know tobacco kills. We're losing customers. We also know that if people are not addicted to tobacco by age 21, they probably never will be. People who start smoking after age 21 hardly ever get addicted and stick with it. So we need to start marketing this product, which we know kills people, to children. And we need to get them addicted. And if you read these memos, it's kind of chilling because they'll say, most people don't like smoking when they first do it, especially children. So we need to put peer pressure on them. And we need to do this, and we need to do that. And there are these strategy memos about how they are going to get teenagers to start smoking. Morally, how is that any different than the crack dealer at the local schoolyard? In the last 2 weeks, a friend of mine did a trial in which a pacemaker, a medical device manufacturer, they make pacemakers among other things, worked together with a hospital and a doctor to implant unnecessary pacemakers in patients who didn't need them. Because there's huge money to be made for the doctors, for the hospital, for the company in putting pacemakers into people. You can't make this stuff up, and if people don't believe it, but you see the internal documents, they write this down. This is what we're going to do to make sure patients who don't need them get unnecessary pacemakers. Oil companies who go into the third world and knowingly pollute because they don't believe anybody in these third world countries are going to hold them accountable. Companies that make robotic surgery machines that they sell to doctors and hospitals, knowing that the doctors and hospitals are not going to be competent to use them, and that a certain number, roughly the first 20 patients, are going to be experimental subjects for the doctors. Nursing homes that are so understaffed that the employees testify that they're crying at work because they're walking by older people who've fallen in the halls and they don't have time to help them because they have so many other people they have to help. Men and women in their 70s and 80s who's, just horrible things in nursing homes. And the truth is the cost of injuring or killing people in this country is relatively cheap compared to the money to be made from cutting corners on safety, from misleading people, from cheating people. There's even money to be made intentionally hurting people. And after decades of looking at those kind of documents and seeing the kind of human devastation that comes in their wake, it began to occur to me that what I had seen on the surface about our legal system and about our culture was misleading. I began to see that every corporate decision is really a cost-benefit, risk-benefit decision. And it's not evil. It's not like, you know, we have this idea in America that the bad stuff is done by evil people. It's not. The bad stuff, by and large, is not done by evil people. It's done by amoral corporations. They exist to make money. They make no bones about it. And that's the default setting every time, is we have a decision to make. Which way do we go? Which will make us the most money in the short run and the long run? And if you look at it, if you start to pay attention, what you see is corporations are happy to set aside the free market ideology, the Republican ideology, the laissez-faire ideology for profit. People don't like to hear this, and I don't expect that all of you are going to agree with me or believe what I have to tell you now. But I would ask you to keep an open mind and start paying attention as you move through life, as you read cases in law school. And see if it isn't true that we live in an occupied country where the occupying forces are these amalgamations of capital, these aggregations of capital that we call corporations, who really control most of the power in this country, most of the institutions in this country. Corporations started as enterprises with limited powers, limited lifespans. They were a legal fiction designed to serve human needs, human interests. And over the last 100 years, the tables have turned. It's almost like one of those science fiction stories where the robots have taken over the world and now the humans are their slaves. Same kind of thing goes on in our country now. And it's so ubiquitous, most of us don't even see it or notice it anymore. I want to be clear, it's also true that corporations have brought us unbelievable quality of life. I'm not saying that the corporate form is evil or that the people who work for corporations are evil. But the system as it's grown up and as it operates today is undermining the moral core of this country. In the corporate state, money's not the most important value, it's the only value. And it's crowding out all the human values. Just in the cases, the examples I gave you earlier today, many of the people involved in those cases, you know, are good parents, good community citizens, contribute to charities, but in their role of working for corporations, they really only have one measure of success, which is how good are they at increasing the profitability of the corporation. And the propaganda arm of the corporations, the advertising and marketing world, bombards us all over and over. They never say, they're smart enough not to say money is the primary value. But if you look at what they do, that's how they live their lives. They took the idea of the free market, originally devised as a way of organizing our economic affairs, and they've turned it into, they've tied it to individual rights and turned it into something akin to a religion. It's sacrilege to say the sort of things that I'm saying right now. because the free market is sacred. At this point, if you pay attention, you'll see that corporate values influence every aspect of American life. Whether you're talking about schools, prisons, the courts, the space program, agriculture, I challenge you to find an area of American life that is not heavily influenced by corporate values. I'll give you one example. There's a recent article in the ABA journal about state governments selling state prisons to private corporations. And Ohio just did that. They sold a prison, and they have a kind of standard clause in that contract that says, okay, Ohio, you're selling us this prison. We agree to pay you this amount of money, and you agree to keep it at a 90% occupancy rate for the next 30 years. And it is not a coincidence that the private prison companies, billion-dollar companies, are some of the biggest lobbyists in support of the war on drugs. And we could go on, and I could go on, and I won't do that to you. But pay attention. Watch what you see. Who buys and sells politicians? Who buys and sells judges, where judges are elected? Who spends billions of dollars a year trying to get our kids hooked on sugar and cigarettes and caffeine? A ceaseless bombardment of you're not good enough. You need to buy more, buy more, buy more. Everything can be measured materially and economically. That is the message. So I propose to you that the real culture wars are not over legalizing marijuana, gay marriage, even abortion. The real culture war is between corporate values and human values. And the rest is just distraction. And the American courtroom is where that culture war is fought viciously every single day. This is our common cause. This is why the trial lawyers I asked to do that thought experiment, none of them would change places with the other side. It's the trial lawyer groups, both the civil and the criminal defense, that have organized resistance to the occupying power. One of the few organized resistance. And in every civil trial, this single corporate value of money and economics is how you measure everything in life. Maximizing profit is at war with human values. Let me take a really simple case to illustrate my point. I mean, it'd be easy to make my point with a tobacco case or a products liability case. Let me take a typical car crash case. Come into the courtroom. On one side of the courtroom is a man in his mid-40s. He's a maintenance engineer at a local large building somewhere. And he's in charge of maintenance. He's a supervisor. On the other side of the courtroom is a 68-year-old retired school teacher. And you find out that the school teacher rear-ended this man in his early 40s. And he's got herniated discs and back problems as a result. And if you walked into that courtroom before you went to law school, you might think, well, he's trying to get money from her because she hit him from behind. And that's kind of true. But now that you've been to law school, you know, well, really, he's trying to get money from her insurance company. And that's true. But if you look a little further below the surface to what's going on in that courtroom, what you see is he's saying, because of these back injuries, I can't go fishing on Saturdays with my children like I used to. And I can't bowl on Wednesday nights with my friends like I used to do. And on the other side of the courtroom, the defense is saying, well, that's got no economic value. That's not worth anything. And he's saying, I can't sleep at night. And I'm in a bad mood all the time. And I'm fighting with my wife all the time because I'm always in pain. And they're saying, well, you still have your job. That's not worth anything. And besides, you're probably faking. And as you go back and forth, what you see is two very different cultures, two very different mindsets. In one culture, everything is reduced to the bottom line. And in the other culture is trying to convince 12 people that there's something more to life, trying to raise up, actually. If you look at what defense lawyers, civil defense lawyers typically do, they try to appeal to the worst in people. They try to convince them that the plaintiffs are faking, that they're overreaching. They've been very successful, especially in the media, convincing people of that. But that's the culture war. That's what the fight in the courtroom is about. And you'll see that over and over again, case after case after case. When you watch a personal injury case, whether somebody's been injured by a improperly inserted pacemaker, by a car that explodes when it's not supposed to, there are a lot of little stuff most people never hear about. Cribs that strangle children, flammable pajamas. The list goes on and on and on. Copper 7, Dalcon Shield. It's a parade of horrors, and it's the same story over and over and over again. Corporate values coming at odds with human values. And the bottom line is corporations don't value the things the rest of us do. Family, pleasure, human dignity, beauty, compassion, courage, love. It's just not in their makeup to do that. That's not how they're organized. Every one of those will be trampled in pursuit of corporate profitability. And every one of them has been and continues to be. And those are the things that trial lawyers fight for. Civil defense lawyers come into court and their job is to denigrate those qualities, those values, or to defend corporate practices that denigrate those values. And the choice you're going to have, and I apologize for being the one to point it out to you, a lot of people don't want to hear this, the choice you're going to have as a lawyer is to collaborate with that system, try to remain neutral, which is just about impossible, or to join what I like to call the last resistance, the people who are actively pushing back against the tidal wave of corporate values that's sweeping over this country. Like the resistance fighters in World War II, we face a well-organized, very powerful force. They hold all the power in our institutions. Like the resistance fighters, we can't use the same tactics that they do. What works for them will not work for us. And like the resistance fighters, we need to we have to be clear about our values, and we have to secure the support of the population, which frankly we've done a terrible job at. We face a force of unlimited power, And the battle lines have been drawn over the last 100 years. And personally, I think it's going to be the next 50 years that determines who wins, who determines the whole future of our country and maybe the world. And I think it's your generation that's going to decide how this comes out. And that's why you should be a trial lawyer. Now, you don't have to be a trial lawyer to be part of the resistance. You just need to stay focused on human values and not and work at developing your own values and not let them be corrupted by the forces around you. There's plenty of legal jobs where you can help out and make a stand. But I want to talk to you about a trap that all of you are susceptible to. Every one of us lawyers is susceptible to. Here at law school, you've been taught to see both sides of an issue, sometimes 3 or 4 different sides of an issue. You've been taught to argue all sides. That's a good thing. It builds intellectual strength. It makes you nimble. It allows you to broaden your worldview. But it's also a dangerous thing. The fact that there are 2 sides to an issue does not mean that there are 2 morally right sides to an issue, that all sides are morally the same. Kind of like that joke I heard the other day of somebody complaining in Louisiana that they're not teaching both sides of the slavery controversy. You know, the fact that there are 2 sides does not mean they're both morally neutral. And lawyers face more moral choices than any occupation I know. It happens in big ways, and it happens in small ways, and it happens every single day. And we've been taught to rationalize, essentially. Lawyers have rationalized and justified marketing cigarettes to children, destroying evidence, soliciting perjury, torturing people. Behind every awful thing that's happened in this country is a lawyer, one or more, rationalizing and justifying that conduct. And the lawyers who did these things didn't wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to help this company or this government do this morally abhorrent thing. These acts were a result of a career full of choices that shaped that lawyer's character, a career full of rationalizations that shaped that lawyer's character, a career full of negligence, lack of due care about that lawyer's character, how it was developing. As lawyers, every single day, you're going to be faced with moral choices, big and small. And my best advice to you about how to have a satisfying career is to pay attention to the value choices that you make. I know you've got a lot of student debt and a lot of pressures of all sorts. And you have to be practical, and you have to pay attention to the practical realities of making a living and getting your way through the world. And I'm not suggesting that you don't do that. But it's very easy while you're focused on those things to lose sight of the sort of person you want to become. Whether you pay attention or not, you're going to be living your values. You're going to be shaping your character. You're going to be creating your own character, as a matter of fact. And some of you, well, think of it this way. If you bill by the hour, as many of you will be, every 6 minutes, 1/10 of an hour, what if you work, I don't know, 8 minutes? Do you round up or do you round down? If you're a plaintiff's lawyer and you have a fee agreement that allows you to take 1/3 of the fee, 1/3 of what's recovered, and you write 1 letter and you get a $100,000 policy limits settlement, Do you take the full third? Now, I could argue either side of those, but it's not my character at issue. And those are the kinds of choices you're going to be faced with every single day. You'll be expressing your values and creating your character in how you treat your staff, how you treat your opponent. Do you get in shouting matches or do you cave? These are questions of personality and skill, but they're also questions of character. And ultimately, when you have a successful career, you're going to have choices to make about what cases to take. And that'll shape your character too. And you're probably all thinking, well, I have a really great character. And I'm here to tell you, apologetically again, that you don't. You haven't lived long enough. It's still in form. It's still being shaped. And you are an active participant in shaping it, whether you're conscious of it or not. So you better be conscious of it, or you will wake up one day and wonder how you got there. The lawyers I know who have paid attention to the issues of value, what do they value? Are they living their values throughout their career? Are some of the most happy, satisfied people I know. And the people who have not done that, despite enormous outward success, are some of the unhappiest people I know. You can see, I'm old enough now. I have people I've known in the practice of law for 35 years. And if I'd run sort of the film reel in my head and watch what's happened to some of them, it's kind of frightening. Because there's not a lot to distinguish them from the ones who came out okay, except, as I look back, certain ones were paying attention to the values they were living and others weren't. It'd be presumptuous of me to tell you what sort of character you should have, and I'm not here to do that. But I am here to tell you one of the most exciting parts of practicing law is you get to shape your character every single day. And you get to create this work of art. And you will create a work of art. It may be ugly or it may be beautiful, but you will create a work of art, consciously or not. And it'll be created in your interactions with your opponents, with the judge, with your clients. It'll be created with your technical skills. And it will be created out of your own values as you choose to express them or not express them. You will either be fighting for your values and expressing them, or you're going to be betraying them. There is no in between. And I want to tell you a secret. If you can manage to find values worth living for that are satisfying to you, the law will give you a way to express those if you want it. And if you can find values worth living for and fighting for and expressing, then you will never be beaten. You will never lose. And I offer up to you the examples of Clarence Darrow, Thurgood Marshall, Atticus Finch. What are they remembered for? Not their won-loss records. As far as I know, Atticus Finch was 0-1. Not their won-loss records. They're remembered for what they fought for and how they lived their values. And in a real sense, none of them were ever beaten. So we need a new generation of trial lawyers. We badly need a new generation of trial lawyers. Lawyers who choose to stand and fight, who don't give in to cynicism, greed, or fear, It's fallen to us to stand and fight for people without power or voice, to fight for compassion, human dignity, love. We really are the last resistance. We are the luckiest people on earth. And I invite you to join us. Thank you.